It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts, Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome back to another Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders, and I'm pretty sure we were on the screen for about 3 seconds before the intro played, because sometimes StreamYard likes to do that. Alan, how are we feeling?
Feeling good. Feeling good.
It almost feels like your computer was actually the one running the show for that intro, based off what you're telling me is going on with your computer.
I'll have a little issue here. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
You're having a little issue. I think a lot of people at Steelers Nation are having a lot of issues, honestly, since the season ended. It's just been one long, basically Festivus, if you will. December 23rd, we call it Festivus. I feel like it's been that for Steelers fans since the season ended. Every single day we got gripes, we got grievances to air. They continue to happen in our comments. And honestly, social media kind of flooded today with something that, just having a little discussion before we start recording, both of us don't even really feel like is like meaningful. Like, you call it a nothing burger. This is where I wanted to start. Jim Rooney's comments regarding the Steelers.
What's funny is that I wasn't actually sure where you were going with this, because there's probably like more than one thing going around out there that could fit into that category.
Yeah, well, I'm keeping you on your heels as well as everybody else. But anyway, I wanted to start with Jim Rooney's comments just because I wanted to get your take on what was said on Ross Tucker's podcast. Just about, where the organization is at, kind of went into their playoff failures as of late, why he believes that they've happened, just the state of the organization as a whole. What did you take away from what he had to say?
I think he's right. I mean, he said it's organizational failure. I think that's pretty accurate. I think the thing that most, there's a natural, looking for the right word, there are going to be dips in your ability to compete as an organization naturally. And for the most part, you don't really have any control over that. Like, you don't really have any control over when you are able to get a franchise quarterback and what happens at the end of their career. It's basically just dumb luck. And so, I don't think a lot of what's happened to the Steelers in the last 5 years is anybody's fault. And I think most of what's happened to the Steelers in the last 5 years has been the result of poor drafting. And while Mike Tomlin has a say in who gets drafted, that is not his primary area of responsibility, nor is it his primary area of expertise, nor is he responsible for the outcome of that process. And so I think if you want to say it's an organizational issue, I agree with that. I've said that. The problem is they don't have enough talent. Number one problem with the team by a long shot is that they don't have enough talent in the most important positions on offense. And, that's how you get here. And there's no easy way to shortcut the process of getting out of there. And I don't think who the coach is really has anything to do with that.
I think the people's biggest issue, right or wrong, was kind of just going through the playoff years and the way that he did and saying why he felt like basically making excuses for why they lost those games and why it's been a playoff drought. And I'm not saying like what he said, largely correct, but I just think a lot of people are fed up with the lack of success and didn't want to hear excuses being made for why they haven't won a playoff game in so long.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to know why, or do you just want to be angry? Because, I think he broke down the why pretty accurately. I think the why matters. I think the fact that there are many different whys in there is why it's foolish to make the connection between them. That there's nothing that happened against Jacksonville in 2017 was even 1/1,000,000% relevant when the Steelers took the field a week ago Saturday against the Baltimore Ravens. Like, they're completely unconnected. Nothing had to do with the others. So, yeah, it's a really, really unintellectual way to look at football when you try to connect things that are not related. And, people not want to hear it. Yeah, I know. I say it all the time. I know people don't want to hear it, but it's true.
And, the one consistent that is obviously within there, the head coach, I think is largely why people have this reaction in the way that they do, because he has been the one consistent there. I'm curious what the reaction would be Alan, if the Steelers were to fire Mike Tomlin and make the playoffs and then lose in their first playoff game, continue the playoff drought, what the reaction would be to them continuing to not win a playoff game?
The reaction is nonsensical. So I would not expect it to be sensical. It's like people who complain about like going for 2 that only ever complain about it when it doesn't work. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
it was a bad call because it didn't work. Well, like if that's the way you process information, it's wrong, but like I'm not going to convince you that it is. So, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. You mentioned that you feel like the biggest issue with this team, and I agree. We've had many conversations about this, is the lack of talent on the roster, largely going back to the draft. That is always kind of the way the Steelers have wanted to largely build their roster, is through the draft and kind of supplement it here and there with free agency. You spent a lot of time on your morning rush talking about, the roster and what should be free agency holes plugged or what they should do in the draft. And I think that that's an interesting conversation to bring up on here too. You said you wanted to get my thoughts. I think it's interesting just because I don't think it's always the same answer for me. Like every year it's going to be different, right? Depending on what the strengths are of each class. Not a great year for a quarterback, obviously, in the draft. Not a great free agent class necessarily a quarterback either. When do you ever see like legit quarterbacks really hit the market? Not very often. Running back, however, also free agency pool pretty thin, which is why I think Najee Harris is going to do very well. But there's like 30 running backs, in my opinion, that are draftable. Like you can find some dudes in there. We've talked about the receivers. T. Higgins, should he hit the open market, that is like a bona fide true number 1 type guy hitting the market. Beyond him, the next 2 guys are guys that are coming off season-ending injuries, probably, in Stephon Diggs and Chris Godwin. In the way that you churn out receivers from the draft year after year, that probably is one position where you can kind of always look at and say, this is a position that we can draft ready-made guys, plug and play in our system. So yeah, I think, year by year basis is kind of how I look at it. Do you think that organizations look at it differently and kind of always follow the same path? Or do you think that they operate like different based off the year it is too?
No, I mean, you have to be aware. The best organizations have to be not only understanding of the world around you and what you need and what's available, but also the way the wind is blowing. Okay, here's a really good example. This past season, Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry were both free agent running backs. They got paid well below what they're probably worth on the open market, because the trend has been recently that teams don't want to pay running backs at all, even really, really good ones, and proven to be really, really good ones. They both went out there and had incredible seasons. I voted for Saquon Barkley for MVP. He just won Offensive Player of the Year in the PFWA awards today. So which way is the wind going to blow? Is the trend going to go toward teams picking up on this and saying, oh, we actually kind of overcorrected, and while you probably shouldn't draft running backs in the first round, and you shouldn't be paying all your running backs, Carolina, Chuba Hubbard, but like there are certainly some of these guys that are really worth this amount of money, or is it not? Okay, so like the best organizations are going to see that and try to decide where they think the trend is going. It's what happened to the Steelers last year. I think the Steelers missed the movement in the wide receiver market. I think that's why they traded Deontay Johnson for what they got for him when they traded him, when they could have held him until later in the summer and gotten far more. And that's why they weren't able to get a replacement when they thought they were going to be able to replacement, because they misread where the market was going. And so, yeah, I think not only do you have to tailor it to what's out there every year, what your team needs every year, but also the way the league's market is shifting and the way teams are changing, the way they're going to evaluate players.
I have it. This just kind of popped in my mind as you mentioned Saquon. Obviously, Derrick Henry still would have did what he did. Josh Jacobs had a nice year. Joe Mixon, after being let go by Cincinnati, had a nice year. Even Aaron Jones, who was let go by Green Bay in favor of Josh Jacobs, had a pretty nice year in Minnesota. Tony Pollard, not sure if he's worth 7.5, but they formed a nice little 1-2 with him and Tyjae Spears in Tennessee. But if the Giants would have paid Saquon Barkley what the Eagles ultimately did. He stayed there. Wouldn't have had the same numbers, but still would have had a very nice year, I expect. Would that have changed the conversation at all about the running back, just because of them not having the team success for him?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Not only that, I think it's. I think the fact that the Eagles were already a good team and they were like, hey, we need this. Like, look, Howie Roseman's 3 years in a row, my vote for general manager of the year. When he does things, people take note. Like, it's easier to write off something the New York Giants are doing. They stink. They're not a trendsetter. If Howie Roseman does something and it works, that's going to get a lot more attention around the league. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. Going back to like the way that I'm kind of viewing the needs, and I wanted to get obviously your opinion on here as well. For anybody that doesn't watch the Morning Rush, but you absolutely should if you're here. I the wide receiver position is what I keep going back to, just because I think it's entirely possible that they double dip, not necessarily both in free agency or both in the draft. Maybe it's 1 and 1. I just think that they're going to add more than one. So I think that's an interesting one to say. They could sign a veteran, sure, but I also think they could draft one very early, and I think that they could both happen simultaneously.
Yeah, I think they could draft 2. I think they could sign 1 and draft 1, or trade for 1 and draft 1. I mean, heck, if they trade Pickens, they need 3. Yeah. Really? I mean, that's like,
yeah.
So, yeah, I expect them to be engaged in wide receivers in multiple lanes. PFF today suggested Amari Cooper as a fit for the Steelers.
Yeah.
That's one that I have not heard come up yet. Down year for him, statistically. I think it took a little while for him to get into a groove in Buffalo when he signed there. Still really hasn't, to be honest. Hasn't been a big, impactful guy in the playoffs. Might be a little cheaper than he otherwise would have been. Certainly coming off back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons in Cleveland, probably would have been very expensive. Now I think maybe you could get him kind of reasonably. I don't want to say that's the only move at wide receiver, but I think like you're talking about, if your plan is to go to the well twice here, I could be okay with that being one of the two.
To me, I would think like you mentioned, maybe it's even 3 if they trade Pickens. I think that's the scenario where I'm cool with it. I think we're past the point of seeing him play in like a lot of 2 receiver set, like led the league this year in drops and drop percentage, like wasn't targeted a whole lot, dropped the ball, thought he took a step back physically, wasn't getting the same level of separation. And I know that things obviously, like when you transition systems, maybe that's why it hasn't gone so well in Buffalo too. But I think that we were kind of seeing the downswing even take place independent of the quarterback play that he was getting in Cleveland. So for me to be okay with that, to be honest, like that's kind of, I know people have thrown the name like Keenan Allen out there, like sub that name with Amari Cooper is what I'm saying. So like Amari Cooper instead of Keenan Allen, but still getting 2 other guys.
I think I like
so like Emeka Egbuka.
Keenan Allen.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So like, but if I'm getting Amari Cooper, I'm still adding 2 other guys as opposed to just 1 other guy in the receiver room. So it's, Emeka Egbuka potentially early, somebody else in free agency, Amari Cooper, Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson. There's my receiver room.
Yeah. I think that's. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think if you're like, you got to find a way to be better than. I don't know. Like, it's hard. There's just not a whole lot out there. Like you said, like Higgins, Godwin. After that, it's real questionable. And I don't think the wide receiver position is deep enough, low enough in the draft that you can just go in and say, oh, well, we'll get one. Like I think that's bad process. They did that too much last year, I think, where they went into the draft at multiple positions, kind of saying, oh, well, we'll get one. And you kind of saw the math not work out where they didn't get everything they needed. And I think they've got to be more proactive in free agency this year than they were last year.
Well, I mentioned,
signing somebody that is not like what you really want, even if it's just kind of checking a box.
Even if it's Nick Westbrook-Akine, who has experience with Arthur Smith, had 9 touchdowns last year on 32 receptions.
Yeah.
Nick threw that name out to me, and he's like, "The Steelers are gonna sign this guy, aren't they?" And I was like, "Ooh."
As like a wide receiver 4, okay, like.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just saying that seems like the type of move that sets yourself up to, like, they always like to check those boxes before the draft, right? Where it's like, if we don't get a guy at this position, we signed somebody in free agency. Maybe not to the level that you would have liked us to check this box at, but we got somebody in place there. They do that every year, and I just feel like that is the prototypical guy that like placeholder spot. Where if they don't draft one early, they have this guy in place.
I think the wide receiver position is beyond that. I think they have to find a number 1 wide receiver. And if they can't get Higgins, they can't get Godwin, then they got to find a way to trade for one somehow, some way. I don't think you can sign some scrub, some random vet, and then say, "Oh, we'll get one in the draft." I don't see how it works. Unless you're planning to trade up into the top 5, get Ted McMillan, I guess. Like, okay, maybe.
Yeah, I understand the injuries with Roman, but like I mentioned, the idea of, you get all these guys that are coming in ready-made now, and we got nothing from the receiver that we drafted, and we're fine with waiting on till the 3rd round. So, that does get burned, obviously, from time to time. So, Russell Wilson. Let's talk about Russell Wilson. He was on the Pat McAfee show today. I had no clue that he was going to be on there, by the way. I don't know if that was like spontaneous or what, but he was on the Pat McAfee show, obviously talked about the year, kind of recapped his time in Pittsburgh this past season, said that he wants to finish his career here, which we fully expected him to say. He's kind of said that already. But the part of that he kind of threw in, though, was they have started conversations, which I think is interesting. Now, where those conversations go, what the starting point is at, I have no clue. What do you make of that? And does it surprise you at all based off the conversation where we were both in agreement that we thought it was more likely the Justin Fields path?
Yeah, I still think
it's not, but
it's more likely it's Justin Fields, but they have to absolutely do their due diligence with everybody. I'm sure there has been a start of a conversation with well more than half of their 24 pending free agents. Hey, what are you thinking? Do you even want to come back? If you did, what kind of deal might you be looking for? You're just not doing your job as a front office if you're not having those conversations. And so I don't think it means anything. It would be really surprising to hear that they hadn't had any conversations, to be honest. Even if the Steelers have next to no intention of bringing him back, it would still be really surprising to hear that they didn't have any conversations.
Yeah, I was just curious if that shifted your mind at all. Yeah, because who even knows?
That was the other thing I was talking about. People kind of losing their minds, and I'm like, this is kind of a non-story, to be honest. Like it matters because he said it, but it would be really surprising if they weren't at least talking to all of their pending free agents. It would be a way bigger story if they weren't, right?
Yeah.
If it was, he was like, no, I haven't heard from anybody since the day I walked out of the building. That would be a way bigger story.
Just what if you have a conversation with him and he's like, yeah, I'll take $5 million to come back. Then it's like, oh, well then, yeah, no brainer. Bring him back. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, he could be like, I'm actually willing to play for a non-guaranteed vet minimum. I'd like to sign that right now.
Right. Yes. Okay. That's why you have to have that conversation.
Also you have to protect yourself. Maybe the conversation with Justin goes, no way, man, you guys picked Russ over me. I'm out. I want to go somewhere else. Yeah. Or maybe the conversation is, I'm only coming back if I get 3 years guaranteed. You don't know. And so maybe Justin Fields goes, weightlifting tomorrow and shatters his pelvis. I don't know. You got to at least know what your options are. You got to talk to people and understand, it may be plan F, but you at least got to do your due diligence on it.
Even in these hypotheticals, we're getting guys hurt. This strength and conditioning staff, we got to do something about them.
I remember Justin Fields last year was doing all this, he was on vacation doing workouts in the garage of what looked like it Airbnb or something like that. I'm like, don't get hurt there. Just please don't get hurt there.
Well, to be honest, he was in Egypt riding camels at one point last off season. So he was doing a little bit of everything. Stephen had a question kind of regarding Fields, but more so about people behind him and building a quarterback room. Stephen 116th with a $10 donation. We appreciate you, Stephen. Says, is there a free agent quarterback who might be similar to Fields that we could sign as a backup, assuming that Fields is going to be the starter?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I get it, right? It's kind of like the Snoop Huntley, Lamar Jackson plan, right? Where like if you're going to revamp your offense to be this thing where you're maximizing the strengths of a running quarterback, then you would want your backup to be somebody who could also play in that offense, just in case, especially if you're going to be emphasizing the running quarterback. They are certainly injury prone at that perspective. The sad answer to the question is twofold. One, no, there's not. I looked, like there's nobody that even, I mean, Snoop Huntley is the one that you would, but I mean, at this point, he's not Justin Fields. I mean, I guess he's the closest one that you would really have to being able to do that. The second part of this is I would not expect the Steelers to go full Ravens, Greg Roman, and redesign their offense around Justin Fields if they make him the starter. Like I don't see that level of commitment to him coming from this team this offseason.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. I think what's interesting is the guy that I would say isn't a free agent. It's through the draft and probably get drafted way earlier than I'd be willing to spend the pick on him if you're trying to find something of a Justin Fields type. But Jalen Milroe, right, out of Alabama, I think is probably the most similar in the draft to a Justin Fields type. If you're looking at free agency, I don't see it. Maybe if Marcus Mariota was like 5 years younger.
That's what I'm saying with Huntley. Like, yeah, maybe a little bit.
Right.
Kind
of. Yeah,
I have a take about Jalen Milroe.
Yeah.
I have heard some people saying the Steelers like him. And I have also heard that the Steelers like him. But my prediction is that the Steelers will have to trade up to get Jalen Milroe from 21 in the first round. That he will end up going in the middle of the first round. And I am way out at that price range.
So the Steelers like him, and then there's like some teams that are evaluating him as a running back, which is interesting too.
Yeah. I think he's going to go. First of all, he's at the Senior Bowl, and it does not seem like either of the other two guys are going to work. I think he has an opportunity to look pretty good there. I think he's going to test really well. He's a crazy athlete, and he's so much better than every other quarterback in this class. And with the two guys going high, like there's just like somebody's going to be desperate and be like, no, we got to pull the trigger here. And I expect it to happen well before he gets to the Steelers.
Yeah. I mean, he's so far away, in my opinion. Like, and not only that, but like the landing spot's obviously going to matter. We've talked about it before. Do I have any faith that dropping him in with this, like, who is the person on this staff that we're saying, look at this project in Jalen Milroe, let's turn him into a franchise quarterback? What about this coaching staff gives us any faith that they would be able to take that project and mold it into what they need it to be?
He's completely the wrong kind of player for like what they need. I totally agree.
Speaking of Jalen Milroe, Felipe Franks is a free agent.
Felipe Franks, I was doing some research when I was doing my all NFL voting for the PFWA, and I if you want to know who my picks were, I think I talked about some of them here, but I did do a story over at SteelersNow.com. But Felipe Franks was like among the leaders in special teams tackles this year.
Oh, I didn't even know he was playing special teams. Like wow. Okay.
There you go.
They got him they got him Taysom Hill in it at this point.
He had like, I don't know, 10 tackles on special teams this year, I think.
Okay. All right. All right, so yeah, we appreciate the question, Steven. We'll see which route they go. I guess we're not believing that Skylar Thompson's the guy to be behind
I would
Justin
be
Fields.
kind of surprised if he makes the team, to be honest. I think it's a pretty uninspiring quarterback 3.
Yeah. Yeah, that's somebody was like, is this the backup? And I was like, best case scenario for him, he's the 3. Like, yeah. Preston Lanigan here. Hey guys, big fan of the show, everyday listener. Speaking of positional value in the first round, what do you think is more important for the Steelers to target? Either defensive tackle with pass rush capability, like a Derek Harmon to replace Larry Ogunjobi, since he'll more than likely be a cap casualty, or would it be wiser to target a wide receiver like a Emeka Egbuka or Matthew Golden due to inflating costs of wide receivers in free agency? I think the Steelers will sign one in free agency with the Pickens antics and him being a contract year. I think it might be best to draft one in the first round and get one in free agency to have a backup plan if Pickens is moved, something they didn't do last year. If they're going to stick with Fields, maybe it's best to surround him with some weapons on the outside and see what they can do, because he hasn't had that since he was at Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm talking about defensive line, I think it's run stopping, not pass rushing that they need. I think they need a Cam Hayward replacement eventually, not a Larry Ogunjobi replacement. I think Keanu Benton is the Larry Ogunjobi replacement. We talked about that yesterday. So, like, I think I'm more on the lines of Kenneth Grant, Tyleik Williams than I am, Derek Harmon, for example, who's like a Oregon pass rusher. I think the bigger the better for me on defensive line. Kenneth Grant's actually a really interesting guy. Big dude. Mason Graham is the real star on the Michigan defensive line. He's going to probably go in the top 5. Kenneth Grant is going to be down somewhere around the Steelers, and he is just a giant dude. But you'll have to look up. There's a highlight of him against Penn State where he runs down, I think it's Singleton, from about like 25 yards from behind, runs him down. And I know that Cam would hate to hear this because of the uniform that Kenneth Grant is wearing, but watch that clip and tell me it doesn't look like Cam Hayward. Like, just that big dude with that super hot motor just flying downfield. I don't know. I can see Kenneth Grant. So, like, I think if they're looking D-line, it's Cam 2.0. That's what they're looking for. If it's wide receiver, I think it depends on what happens in free agency first, obviously. But, Golden, you mentioned, Egbuka, I like Isaiah Bond from Texas as well. Trey Harris from Ole Miss is probably more like another George Pickens type. All those guys could be potentially first-round guys. So, I don't know. I think ideally I would take care of wide receiver before you get to the draft substantially. Not that you can't still add to it, but substantially take care of wide receiver before you get to the draft, and then be able to draft a defensive lineman. But I think that's going to be easier to say than it is going to be to do. Yep.
No, I'm in full agreement. Kind of with everything there. Like, I'm curious to see how they attack it. I'm curious to see if we know that they don't really play a traditional nose tackle a ton, but I'm curious if they want like somebody in that body type, if they are going to move Keanu Benton like into that Ogunjobi role as like a full-time, if they do move on from Ogunjobi. Like, I saw somebody mention like the name BJ Hill in the comments. What's your thought in terms of adding like an actual true nose tackle? Not important enough, they're not valued enough to even address it at all? Or
I don't get the sense that they feel like they play enough base defense to be able to keep a just nose tackle on the roster. I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but that's the vibe that I get about what they think about their positions. So certainly a bigger bodied guy they can try to find, a run stopping specialist maybe,
right.
But I don't think that they feel like they absolutely need somebody who's checking the 350 on their team. And in fact, really don't want that, because they want that third defensive lineman to be able to play in the nickel and the dime. They don't want them to just be a nose tackle. And it's really hard to find somebody who is a 350-pound nose tackle that can also effectively rush the passers at 3-tech. Like, if those guys existed, sure, they would go find one of them.
Right. Yeah. And they'd probably have to trade up to do it, because I don't know if they're sticking around still at 21. If they have the ability.
Yeah. Mason Graham can play nose. Not that you would want him to, but
Okay, I know we're coming up here on 30 minutes, but we got to get to one more just because Desert Cactus gave us $2 as well. We appreciate that. And it's a question follows. Hey, guys, as a direct follow-up to this point that I've noticed, I don't think it's necessarily the case that Colbert's first-round picks were failures as such in their intention of how they were drafted. They were high floor picks with an emphasis on replacement. Najee replaced Connor, Pickett replaced Ben, Bush replaced Shazier, etc. The thing to me that is quite a few of them accomplished the goal perspective of providing a floor. The team did end up consistently 10-7 or 9-8 after all. So much of the draft conversation is on the ceiling versus floor dichotomy. But something I've noticed that Kahn emphasizes to a much greater degree than Colbert is that he deprioritizes replacement of departing pieces in the draft, prioritizes getting higher ceiling player at a high value position. Free agency is where replacement happens with Kahn. It is an important change to the team's roster building. I don't think it's talked about nearly enough.
Yeah, well, I think it's been an essential one because they've had too many holes every offseason to just fill them in the draft. Like we just were talking about earlier, Kevin Colbert did not really use free agency. The Steelers just used the draft because they were a really good team for most of his tenure as general manager. And that's the thing I'm not ever saying Kevin Colbert was bad at his job. I think the last few years was a struggle, but one of the best general managers of all time to build 2 Super Bowl winners and a third team that got there. And so a lot of those years, the team was really good. They only had 1 or 2 holes. They sat out in the draft to fill 1 or 2 holes. And I think when you do it that way, when you approach it that way, you do limit your upside because you're only in the store to shop for one thing. So you're missing a deal if it exists somewhere else, right? If you just go into the grocery store and you got your eyes buried in your phone, okay, I need pretzels, I need Cheez-Its, I need Mountain Dew. Okay, I'm out of here. You missed the fact that prime rib was on sale for 99 cents a pound. Like you didn't pay any attention to it. So I think if you're going into the draft with multiple things that you need, or if you're going into the draft having already filled some things in free agency and you give yourself some flexibility, I think it makes it a little bit easier to shoot for those high upside, high value positions from time to time.
That prime rib for 99 cents, also known as Trent McDuffie in 2022 when they drafted Kenny Pickett.
How about Lamar Jackson?
Yeah, that was, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I understand, and I can't necessarily disagree with where Desert Cactus is coming from here in terms of the philosophical change. And we have obviously given Kevin Colbert a ton of credit for obviously the entire body of work, but also acknowledging that the last few drafts are largely why this team sits where they are, not only because of the players that are on the roster now, but also taking it a step further. They haven't lost talent to other teams, giving them, the compensatory picks back as well. So, there's a lot to that conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you want to get to this last thing or do you want to wrap it up? And
sure.
Okay. Because Brooklyn, who we know, loyal listener, Brooklyn PSL, Pittsburgh Steelers for life. What questions do we want Rooney to answer when he does speak? This is not Jim Rooney, I assume that we were referring to at this point.
Andy Rooney, I don't think is doing any speaking anymore. Do we know another Rooney? Wayne Rooney. I have questions for him. I'm sure.
Yeah.
I can come up with some. Well, here, I mean, I'm going to have, I assume, the opportunity to do this. I want you to answer it first because presumably you're not. You get Art in a room, or let's say I had Art in the podcast. What's the first thing you want to ask him?
Well, okay, so last year at the end of the season, I would say it was pretty point blank put out there that there's no more waiting around. Like it needs to happen now. They need success to happen now. And every team's going to say that, right? But if there isn't, and we haven't seen any change actually take place, we know that roster turnover has to take place just because you have UFAs and stuff like that. And that's obviously going to happen just naturally. But with the coach, what change is taking place, if at all, to get to the point that they are talking about? Like if you didn't meet the expectation, right? Like you said, there has to be, the time is now. We're not waiting around anymore. You're expecting results now. If the results don't happen, change doesn't happen. Why should we believe that this year is going to be any different. I don't know. I don't know the best way to word that, but that I'm just thinking back to last year at his end of the season saying that, and now we've gone the entire year with basically the same result. I do, like you, we've talked about sport before, believe that the team is a bit better, but not enough for me to not have that question.
Yeah. I think if I'm probably gonna push on some things, I'd like to know. And look, I don't actually expect to get answers out of any of this. Art is a lawyer by trade. He's a pretty good one. I don't think I've ever caught him off guard with a question or got him to answer something that he didn't want to answer. So, but I want to know, like, when the Steelers talk about their identity, about running the ball, about focus on defense, and especially like some people over the last couple of weeks that like brought back the video of Bruce Arians talking about getting fired by the Steelers, and like it was pretty obvious if you watch that video that that was not Mike Tomlin's decision. That came from above, and it was because they were getting Ben Hurt hit too much, and they wanted to run the ball more. And like, I guess how much does he consider the Steelers' identity, sort of in an X's and O's standpoint, set in stone? Or is that something that they are willing to have discussions about changing? We've talked, we understand, like, there's been a lot of people say, like, oh, the Steelers do the same thing. And the Steelers have done a lot of things in the last 5 years they've never done before. A lot of them, in terms of structured contracts, in terms of trading their first round draft pick. And like, you could go up and down. There's a lot of things that they never did that they've done before in the last 5 years. So there's been a lot of, I think, getting with the times as an organization that's happened over the last few years. Is that one of those areas where they are open to being different, or they could just consider smash mouth, toughness, defense, run the ball, football an essential part of the Pittsburgh Steelers brand, to the point that even if it made the team better, they would not consider getting away from it?
Yeah. Kind of going along with that, do they believe that style of football can still win? And today, I mean, I guess they do. You better.
Yeah. It'd be really bad if they said yes and then no to those two questions back to back. But yeah, I mean, I think that's, to me, that's a fundamental question that the owner should have to answer. I think most of the other stuff that you can ask is honestly, another thing I would like to ask is, we talked about this when I talked about the question about Tomlin's contract and how the Steelers are in the bottom half of the league in revenue. Smitty, you and I interact with the Steelers fan base every day. It is a global fan base. It is enormous. We have watched it take over opposing stadiums all over this country. I anticipate when we see it happen, we're going to see it happen internationally in 2025. What do the Steelers have to do, or is it possible for any team based in Pittsburgh, just because of the market size? It feels like to me that Steelers Nation is a top 3 NFL fan base at the worst. Is it possible to get from where they are revenue wise to a place that feels more in standing with their fan base standing compared to other NFL teams? Like, to me, there's no reason why the New York Jets should make more money than the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Jets have stunk for my entire adult life. Heck, my entire life. They've never been good. Like, why? I just, is it just because it's Pittsburgh, or is there more that they feel like they need to be doing that they're not doing, and what's holding them back from competing with those teams revenue wise? Like, to me, the Steelers and the Cowboys are almost peers. I understand the Cowboys have advantages in certain areas that the Steelers don't. They're from a bigger city. They basically, for a long time, covered the entirety of the state of Dallas, state of Texas. But like, to me, those are 1 and 2 in terms of fan bases, and one turns its fan base into a godly amount of revenue, and the other doesn't. And I would like to hear from Art why he thinks that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And while people might think like that's not as important just because it's impacting, losses day to day or whatever, it could. Imagine if they were generating more revenue. We talked about the size of the coaching staff, right? Where there's not a salary cap, and imagine if this team had a bunch more money and they just were an open checkbook with their coaching staff due to that. How much how many complaints would be taken away. At least for me personally, how many complaints would go away on a day-to-day basis. But all right, good stuff. Alan, before we get out of here, tell people they can find you.
At @Saunders_PGH on X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. PGH Steelers Now is the site's account, SteelersNow.com. Go there and read the words so that I can get paid. And also subscribe, hit that bell for notifications here on the YouTube channel so that we keep that drive to 15,000 going. And ready to go, man.
And leave us a 5-star review and subscribe if you're listening somewhere else. Apple, Spotify, wherever your podcast from. Just search Steelers Afternoon Drive. I guess I can't, but I guess you can do the same thing on TikTok right now. Eventually, I imagine that app will be back in the app store so I can get it back. But that's not the case right now. And you can follow me everywhere. Zachary Smith, PGH. Oh, I just thought about something also with the revenue. Structure contracts differently too, right? Like more signing bonuses and changes the game if they were to generate more revenue. So anyways, we're going to get out of here. Find me, Zachary Smith, PGH, Alan Saunders, and myself. Thanks for jumping in and taking another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.